The drums had already started when Lena realized something was wrong. She stood at the edge of the gathering circle, her hands twisted together in front of her, watching hundreds of pack members turn their eyes toward the wooden platform where Alpha Rider stood. Torches burned along the stone path, throwing orange light across the crowd. Lena had imagined this night for years. She had rehearsed it in her mind so many times that she could feel the shape of it before it happened. The way Ryder would call her name. The way he would reach for her hand. The way the pack would howl in approval, because their alpha had finally chosen his mate. She smoothed the front of her pale blue dress and glanced beside her at Mira, her best friend since they were children. Mira's fingers were laced tightly together, and her face looked pale under the torchlight. "Are you nervous for me?" Lena whispered, smiling. Mira did not answer right away. She kept staring straight ahead at the platform, and something about her silence made a small, cold feeling creep into Lena's chest. She pushed it away. Tonight was not a night for doubt. Tonight was the night she had waited for since she was 16 years old, since the first time Ryder had looked at her across the training field, and something had passed between them that she had never been able to name. Elder Corwin climbed the platform steps first, his long gray robe dragging against the wood. He raised both hands, and the drumming stopped. The crowd fell silent so quickly that Lena could hear her own heartbeat. "Tonight," Elder Corwin said, his voice carrying easily across the clearing, "our Alpha will choose the one who stands beside him. This is the oldest tradition of Ashwood Pack. Whoever he chooses will become his bride, and one day, the mother of his heirs." Lena's breath caught. She felt her whole body lean forward, as if her heart were trying to walk toward the platform on its own. Ryder stepped forward. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair that always looked slightly wind-blown even indoors. He had been Alpha for 3 years, since his father passed the title down early, and in that time, Lena had watched him grow into someone the whole pack respected. She had also watched him smile at her more than he smiled at anyone else. She had convinced herself that meant something. He looked out over the crowd, and for one heartbeat, his eyes found Lena's. She smiled at him, ready. Then his gaze moved past her. "I have made my choice," Ryder said. His voice was steady, confident, the voice of a leader who never doubted himself. "Mira, daughter of the Ashfield line, please come forward." For a moment, Lena thought she had misheard him. The sound of her own name was so close to Mira's that surely there had been some mistake, some trick of the wind carrying his voice wrong. But then she saw Mira step forward, her legs shaking, her face somewhere between shock and fear, and Lena understood there was no mistake at all. The crowd erupted into cheering. Lena stood frozen while the world moved around her, people clapping, wolves howling in celebration, someone beside her laughing with joy. She felt herself being pushed slightly forward by the crowd's movement, and somehow her feet carried her closer to the platform, close enough to see Ryder reach for Mira's hand and pull her up beside him. Mira's eyes found Lena's over Ryder's shoulder. There was something in them that looked almost like an apology, though Lena could not understand why her best friend would need to apologize for being chosen. It was not Mira's fault. It was nobody's fault. It was simply not Lena. She realized she was still smiling. Her face had frozen in that expression from before the announcement, and now it felt like a mask she could not remove. Around her, people were beginning to notice her standing so close to the platform, alone, unclaimed, while her best friend was being celebrated as the future of the pack. She made herself keep smiling. She made herself walk forward, one foot after another, until she stood close enough to reach up and take Mira's hand. "Congratulations," Lena said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I am so happy for you." Mira's fingers trembled inside her own. "Lena, I didn't know. I promise you. I didn't know he would choose me. If I had known you." "Don't," Lena said gently, cutting her off before the crowd could hear anything that might embarrass either of them. "Tonight is not about me. Tonight is yours." She let go of Mira's hand and stepped back into the crowd, letting the celebration swallow her whole. People pressed in around the platform, calling out blessings, throwing flower petals into the air. Somewhere, a group of children began to sing an old mating song, their high voices weaving through the noise. Lena kept walking backward, further and further from the light, until the shadows at the edge of the clearing wrapped around her like a second skin. She did not run. Running would have drawn attention, and attention was the last thing she wanted. Instead, she walked, slow and steady, past the last row of watching pack members, past the food tables piled high with celebration dishes, past the fire pit where the elders sat, until she reached the narrow path that led toward the training fields. Only then, once she was certain no one could see her, did she let her face fall. The tears came fast, hot against her cold cheeks. She pressed a hand against her mouth to keep the sound from carrying back toward the celebration. 3 years. She had loved Ryder for 3 years, had believed with her whole heart that the way he looked at her meant something more than friendship, that the way his hand had lingered on her shoulder after training sessions meant he was building toward tonight. She had let herself believe in a future that had never actually existed. She sat down on a low stone wall at the edge of the training field and stared out at the dark trees beyond, listening to the celebration continue behind her. The howls of joy sounded different from this distance, less like celebration and more like mockery, though she knew that was not fair. No one out there was mocking her. No one out there was even thinking of her at all. That was, perhaps, the worst part. She stayed there a long time, long enough for the fire in the distance to burn lower, long enough for the singing to fade into quieter conversation. When she finally stood to walk back, her legs felt stiff from the cold night air, and her eyes ached from crying. As she approached the edge of the clearing again, she saw Ryder standing near the platform, Mira at his side, both of them surrounded by well-wishers. Ryder caught sight of her and lifted a hand in a small wave, as easily as if nothing unusual had happened, as if he had not just crushed something inside her chest without even realizing it. She waved back, because that was what was expected of her, and then she slipped along the outer edge of the crowd toward the small house she shared with her aunt at the far end of the Packlands. Her aunt was waiting on the porch when she arrived, a blanket already draped over her shoulders, as if she had known Lena would need it. "I heard," her aunt said quietly, not asking, simply stating. Lena nodded and let herself be pulled into a hug. She did not cry again, not out loud, but she let herself lean into the comfort for a long moment before pulling back. "I'll be fine," she said. "It was foolish of me to expect anything else. I was never meant to be chosen." "That is not true," her aunt said firmly. "You are worth choosing, Lena." Ryder simply failed to see it. Lena managed a small, tired smile, though she did not entirely believe the words. She went inside and lay awake long after the celebration outside had finally quieted, staring at the ceiling, wondering what it was about her that had made her invisible in a room where she had once believed she was seen. The next morning, the pack was still buzzing with excitement over the announcement. Lena forced herself to attend the morning gathering, where Ryder and Mira stood together, receiving congratulations from pack members who had not been present the night before. She stood near the back, offering polite smiles when people glanced her way, trying to make herself as small and unremarkable as possible. It was during this gathering that a messenger arrived, breathless from running, a folded parchment sealed with a wax stamp Lena did not recognize. The pack fell into a hush as Elder Corwin took the parchment and broke the seal, his eyebrows lifting as he read. "This is a summons," he announced, "from the royal court. The Alpha King has called for representatives from every pack territory to attend the Great Convergence in 7 days' time." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lena had heard of the Alpha King only in stories, a distant and powerful figure who ruled over every pack in the land. Someone so far above ordinary pack life that he seemed almost more legend than man. She had never imagined she would come anywhere near him. "Ryder," Elder Corwin continued, "as our Alpha, you and your chosen bride will represent Ashwood Pack at the gathering. This is a great honor." Ryder's chest puffed slightly with pride, and beside him, Mira looked both thrilled and terrified in equal measure. Lena watched the exchange from the back of the crowd, feeling strangely detached from it all, as if she were watching a play about people she used to know, rather than people she still lived among every day. She did not expect to be included in the conversation at all, and for a moment, she thought that would be the end of it. But then, Elder Corwin's eyes moved to her, and something calculating crossed his expression. "Lena," he said, "you have always been skilled with diplomacy and pack matters. You should accompany them as an attendant. It would benefit Ashwood to bring more than just the alpha pair. Lena felt her stomach drop. The last thing she wanted was to spend a week watching Ryder and Mira play the role of a happy, chosen couple in front of strangers, all while she stood in the background carrying their bags and pouring their drinks. But refusing an elder's request was not something easily done, especially not for someone with her modest standing in the pack. "Of course," she said, because there was nothing else to say. The week that followed passed in a blur of preparation. Mira came to Lena's house twice, trying to talk through the awkwardness that now sat between them like a wall neither of them knew how to climb. Lena accepted her apologies, told her again and again that there was nothing to apologize for, and slowly, the friendship began to feel almost normal again, though something underneath it had shifted permanently. They both knew it, even if neither said it aloud. Ryder, for his part, barely spoke to Lena at all during those days, too consumed with preparations for his role as a newly mated alpha, meeting the royal court for the first time. Lena told herself this was fine. She told herself she did not need his attention anymore, that she was simply going to survive this journey and return home to rebuild whatever life waited for her once the sting of humiliation faded. On the morning they were set to leave for the royal court, Lena packed a single bag with practical clothing, nothing fine or eye-catching, since she expected to spend the entire trip in the background. Her aunt walked her to the edge of the packlands, pressing a small pouch of dried herbs into her hand for the journey. "Keep your chin up," her aunt said. "Whatever happens out there, you are still the same strong girl who has always deserved more than this pack has given her." Lena nodded, though she did not fully believe it, and climbed into the wagon beside Ryder and Mira for the long journey toward the royal court, unaware that somewhere ahead of her, in a place she had never imagined visiting, a very different future was already waiting to find her. The journey took 3 full days, winding through forests that grew thicker and older with every passing mile, until finally, on the evening of the 3rd day, the towers of the royal court rose above the tree line, tall and pale against the darkening sky. Lena stared up at them from the wagon, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life, with no idea that within those very walls, everything she believed about her own worth was about to be completely rewritten. The royal court was unlike anything Lena had ever seen. Tall towers made of pale stone rose above wide courtyards, their windows glowing with warm light even as evening settled over the land. Banners bearing the royal crest hung from every archway, moving gently in the breeze, and the air itself seemed to hum with quiet power, as if the ground beneath the palace remembered every king who had ever ruled from it. Lena climbed down from the wagon last, letting Ryder and Mira step ahead of her as guards in polished armor guided them toward the main gathering hall. She kept her bag close to her chest and her eyes low, trying not to draw attention in a place clearly built for people far more important than her. Inside the hall, the scale of everything nearly stole her breath. Ceilings stretched high overhead, painted with images of wolves running beneath a full moon. Long tables lined the walls, already filling with representatives from packs Lena had only ever heard named in old stories. The noise of dozens of conversations blended together into a low, constant hum, punctuated occasionally by bursts of laughter or the clink of glasses. Ryder straightened his shoulders as they entered, clearly aware that every pack leader in the room would be measuring him, judging whether the young alpha of Ashwood belonged among them. Mira stayed close to his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm, playing her new role as bride with a grace that surprised Lena. She had always known Mira was capable, but watching her charm strangers within minutes of arriving reminded Lena just how naturally her best friend seemed to fit into a life Lena had once imagined for herself. An attendant guided them to their assigned seats near the middle of the hall, a position that reflected Ashwood's modest standing among the gathered packs. Lena was seated slightly behind Ryder and Mira, at a smaller table meant for attendants and lesser representatives. She did not mind. It meant she could watch the room without being watched in return, which suited her perfectly. Dinner passed slowly. Servers moved between tables carrying trays of food Lena had never tasted before. Rich stews and roasted meats, seasoned with spices that filled the hall with warm, complicated scents. She ate quietly, listening to the conversations around her, most of which centered on trade agreements between territories, border disputes, and speculation about why the Alpha King had called this gathering so suddenly, after years of keeping mostly to himself. They say he has not chosen a mate in all these years, one older woman at Lena's table whispered to her companion. The council grows impatient. A king without an heir is a king whose throne remains uncertain. Perhaps that is why he called us all here, her companion replied. Perhaps he means to choose someone at last, from among the packs. Lena listened with mild curiosity but little personal interest. Whatever the king's reasons for the gathering, they had nothing to do with her. She was here only because Elder Corwin had insisted, and she intended to spend the week exactly as she had planned, quietly, invisibly, waiting for the moment she could return home. After dinner, the hall opened into a wide celebration, where music played and pack representatives mingled freely across the floor. Ryder was quickly pulled into conversation with several older alphas, eager to make connections that might benefit Ashwood in the coming years. Mira stayed close to him for a while, but as the evening wore on and the crowd grew louder, Lena noticed her friend's smile beginning to look strained. "Are you well?" Lena asked, stepping closer. "It is a lot to take in," Mira admitted quietly. "Everyone expects me to already know how to behave like an alpha's bride, and I have been one for barely a week." Lena felt a small twist of sympathy despite everything. Whatever complicated feelings she carried about the mate-choosing ceremony, she did not want to see Mira suffer under the weight of a role she had never asked for either. "You are doing well," Lena said honestly. "Better than I would, probably." Mira gave a small laugh, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "Thank you for saying that. I know things have been strange between us. I am glad you are here." Before Lena could respond, one of Ryder's new acquaintances called Mira back over to join a conversation, and Lena found herself alone once more at the edge of the celebration. The noise of the hall pressed in around her, warm bodies and loud laughter, and music that felt too bright for her mood. She slipped toward a side door she had noticed earlier, hoping for a few minutes of quiet air, before returning to the festivities. The door led into a long stone corridor lit by hanging lanterns, and at the end of it, Lena found an archway opening into a garden she had not expected to exist within the palace walls. Tall hedges lined winding paths, and small white flowers glowed faintly under the moonlight, their petals catching what little light filtered down from the towers above. A fountain trickled quietly somewhere nearby, the sound blending with the distant hum of the celebration she had left behind. She should have turned back. She had no idea whether attendants were permitted in this part of the palace, and the last thing she wanted was to embarrass Ashwood Pack by wandering somewhere forbidden. But the garden was so peaceful, such a stark contrast to the overwhelming noise of the hall, that she found herself stepping further along the path before she had fully decided to. She walked slowly, letting the quiet settle over her like a blanket, until she reached a stone bench near the fountain and sat down, closing her eyes for a moment to simply breathe. "You are the first person all week who has come out here just to sit quietly," a low voice said from somewhere behind her. Lena startled, nearly falling off the bench as she turned to find a man standing a short distance away, half hidden in the shadow of a tall hedge. He wore simple dark clothing, nothing like the ornate formal wear she had seen on the pack leaders inside, and for a moment she assumed he must be a member of the palace staff, perhaps a guard on a break from his duties. "I am sorry," she said quickly, rising to her feet. "I did not realize this garden was occupied. I will leave." "There is no need," the man said, stepping closer into a patch of moonlight. He was tall, with dark hair, and sharp, tired eyes that seemed to hold far more weight than his relatively young face suggested. "This garden belongs to everyone tonight, or so the celebration inside would suggest, though clearly not everyone agrees, since you are the only one who seems to want quiet instead of noise." There was something dry and faintly amused in his tone that put Lena slightly more at ease. She sat back down on the bench, and after a brief hesitation, he settled onto the opposite end of it, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I needed a moment away from the crowd," Lena admitted. "It has been a long few days." "I understand that more than you might think," the man said. He glanced toward the glowing windows of the hall in the distance, where laughter and music still drifted faintly through the night air. "Sometimes a room full of people is the loneliest place a person can be." Lena looked at him with mild surprise, It was not the kind of thing she expected a stranger to say, especially not one she had assumed to be palace staff. "That is exactly how it felt in there," she said. "Like everyone had a role to play, and I did not know mine." "What is your role then?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. Lena considered the question longer than she expected to. "I suppose I am an attendant," she said finally. "I came with my Pax Alpha and his new bride." Something flickered briefly across the stranger's expression, though Lena could not read what it meant. "And is that role difficult for you?" She should have brushed the question aside, offered some polite, meaningless answer, and changed the subject. But something about the darkness of the garden, the anonymity of speaking to someone whose name she did not know, and who did not know hers, loosened something in her chest. "The Alpha was supposed to choose me," she said quietly. "Everyone expected it. I expected it. Instead, he chose my closest friend, and I have spent the last week smiling and pretending that is perfectly fine, because what else can I do?" She expected pity, or perhaps awkward silence, the way most people reacted when she admitted the truth of her situation. Instead, the stranger studied her carefully, his sharp eyes thoughtful rather than sympathetic, in a way that felt shallow. "That does not sound easy," he said simply. "But it also does not sound like something that reflects poorly on you. Sometimes the people closest to us fail to see clearly, even when the truth is standing directly in front of them." Lena felt something loosen further in her chest, a tightness she had been carrying since the night of the ceremony beginning, just slightly, to ease. "You are kind to say that to a stranger," she said. "Perhaps," he replied, a small, almost private smile touching his mouth. "Or perhaps I simply recognize foolishness when I hear it described, even secondhand." They sat together for a long while after that, talking about smaller things, the strange beauty of the garden at night, the way the fountain's sound reminded Lena of a stream near her childhood home, the odd formality of palace gatherings that neither of them seemed to fully enjoy. Lena found herself relaxing in a way she had not managed since before the mate-choosing ceremony, comfortable in the presence of someone who did not know her history, did not pity her, and simply listened. Eventually, the sound of the celebration inside began to quiet, signaling the late hour, and Lena realized she should return before anyone noticed her absence and asked questions she did not want to answer. "I should go back," she said, rising from the bench. "Thank you for the company. I did not expect to feel better tonight, but I do." The stranger rose as well, inclining his head slightly. "I am glad to hear it. Perhaps we will speak again before the convergence ends." "Perhaps," Lena agreed, though she assumed, given the size of the gathering and the many events still ahead, that the odds of finding him again among hundreds of guests were slim. She made her way back through the stone corridor and slipped quietly into the hall, finding Ryder and Mira still deep in conversation, near the center of the room, neither of them having noticed her absence at all. She took her seat at the attendance table, feeling strangely lighter than she had in days, though she could not fully explain why a brief conversation with an unnamed stranger in a moonlit garden had done what a week of forced smiles had failed to accomplish. She did not know, as she settled in for the rest of the evening, that the man she had spoken to so openly, the man to whom she had confessed her deepest humiliation without a second thought, was not palace staff at all. She had no way of knowing, sitting quietly at her modest table while the celebration continued around her, that she had just spent an hour speaking freely with the very ruler every pack leader in that hall had traveled so far to see, the Alpha King himself, and that somewhere behind his sharp, tired eyes, something about their conversation had already refused to let him go. Lena woke the next morning to the sound of bells ringing across the palace grounds, calling all Convergence guests to the Great Hall for the first formal session of the gathering. She dressed quickly in the modest attendance clothing she had brought, tied her hair back, and made her way down to join Ryder and Mira, who were already waiting near the entrance of the guest quarters. "You look tired," Mira observed as they walked together toward the hall. "Did you not sleep well?" "I slept fine," Lena said, though in truth she had spent a long while before sleep replaying her conversation in the garden, wondering about the stranger's identity, curious whether their paths might cross again during the week ahead. The great hall looked different in daylight, sunlight streaming through tall windows and catching on the polished stone floors. Rows of seating had been arranged facing a raised platform at the front, where the Royal Council would apparently address the gathered representatives. Lena took her place at the attendance section again, settling in beside a few other quiet, unremarkable figures like herself, people who had come to the convergence in supporting roles rather than as decision-makers. A hush fell over the hall as a side door opened and a procession of council members entered, followed by several palace guards. Lena straightened slightly, curious despite herself, and then went completely still as the final figure entered the hall. It was him, the stranger from the garden. Except now he wore formal robes trimmed in silver, a simple crown resting against his dark hair, and every single person in the hall rose to their feet the moment he crossed the threshold, bowing their heads in immediate respect. Lena scrambled up along with everyone else, her mind spinning, trying to reconcile the quiet, dry-humored man she had spoken with the night before against the figure now walking toward the platform with the unmistakable bearing of absolute authority. "All rise for His Majesty, Alpha King Kalen Vaughn," an announcer's voice rang out, though the announcement felt almost unnecessary given that the entire hall had already risen without prompting. Lena's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the people beside her must be able to hear it. She had spoken so freely the night before, had confessed her humiliation to a complete stranger, never imagining that stranger was the most powerful man in the entire land. Heat rushed to her face as she thought of everything she had said, wondering if he had been laughing at her naivety the whole time, wondering if kings found it amusing to wander gardens listening to foolish attendants pour out their hearts without any idea who they were speaking to. Kalen took his place at the center of the platform, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd with the same calm, measured expression Lena remembered from the garden. For one brief moment, as his gaze swept across the attendance section, she was certain their eyes met, and something flickered across his face, brief and unreadable, before he looked away and began addressing the hall. "Thank you all for answering my summons," Kalen began, his voice carrying easily across the massive space without need for shouting. "I know the journey was long for many of you, and I do not take that sacrifice lightly." Lena barely absorbed the rest of his speech, her mind still reeling from the revelation. He spoke of alliances, of strengthening bonds between packs, of the importance of unity as new threats emerged along the northern borders. His words were measured and thoughtful, delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who had clearly led for years, and despite her shock, Lena found herself listening more closely than she expected, struck by how different his public voice sounded from the low, almost gentle tone he had used in the garden the night before. When the session ended, the hall erupted into quiet conversation as guests began discussing the king's words, speculating about what alliances might be strengthened and what the future held for the packs represented in that room. Lena remained seated for a long moment, still trying to process everything, until Mira touched her arm gently. "You look pale," Mira said. "Are you unwell?" "I am fine," Lena said quickly, forcing herself to stand. "Just tired, as I said." She spent the rest of the day in a daze, moving through scheduled activities, meals, and smaller gatherings, without truly absorbing much of what happened around her. Ryder spent most of the day networking with other pack leaders, clearly enjoying the opportunity to raise Ashwood's standing among the assembled territories, while Mira drifted between polite conversations, still adjusting to her new role as an Alpha's bride. That evening, as the guests gathered again for dinner in the Great Hall, Lena found herself unable to stop glancing toward the raised table at the front of the room, where Kalen sat among the highest-ranking council members, engaged in quiet conversation, his expression as composed and unreadable as it had been during his address. She told herself she was simply curious, that anyone would be curious after such an unexpected discovery, but some small, honest part of her recognized that her curiosity ran deeper than mere surprise. As dinner wound down, a palace attendant approached the Ashwood table, bowing slightly before addressing Ryder directly. "Alpha Ryder, His Majesty requests a brief audience with your pack's delegation tomorrow morning, to discuss matters concerning the northern border territories near Ashwood lands." Ryder's chest swelled with obvious pride at being singled out for a direct audience with the king himself, a mark of favor few pack leaders received during the convergence. "Of course," he said immediately, "we would be honored." The king has also specifically requested the presence of the attendant who accompanied your delegation, the messenger added, glancing briefly toward Lena. For matters related to local diplomatic customs, I believe. Lena felt her stomach drop. Ryder and Mira both turned to look at her with mild surprise, clearly wondering why the king would take any interest in including an attendant in such a meeting, but neither of them questioned it aloud, too pleased by the greater honor of being summoned at all. Of course, Lena managed to say, though her voice came out quieter than she intended. I would be glad to attend. That night, sleep came slowly and unevenly. Lena lay awake, turning the situation over in her mind again and again, trying to guess what Kalen might want from her, whether he intended to address the awkwardness of their previous encounter directly or simply pretend it had never happened. She rehearsed possible greetings, possible explanations, and discarded each one as either too formal or too familiar, uncertain which tone would be appropriate for addressing a king she had unknowingly treated as an ordinary stranger. Morning arrived far too quickly. Lena dressed carefully, choosing the least worn of her modest dresses, and followed Ryder and Mira through the palace corridors toward the private meeting chamber where the audience had been arranged. Guards flanked the tall wooden doors, and as they were led inside, Lena's heart climbed steadily into her throat. The chamber was smaller and warmer than the great hall, with a long table surrounded by comfortable chairs and tall windows overlooking the garden Lena had wandered into 2 nights before. Kalen stood near one of the windows when they entered, his formal robes replaced by simpler attire similar to what he had worn during their first meeting, though the crown remained, a quiet reminder of exactly who he was. Alpha Ryder, Kalen said, turning to greet them with practiced formality. Thank you for joining me. Please, sit. Ryder and Mira took their seats at the table, and Lena moved to stand quietly near the wall as an attendant would typically do, but Kalen's eyes found her immediately. You as well, he said, gesturing toward an empty chair. Please, sit with us. Lena hesitated only a moment before obeying, painfully aware of Ryder's curious glance as she took the offered seat at the table, rather than remaining standing along the wall. The meeting that followed covered exactly the topics the messenger had described: border concerns, resource sharing between Ashwood and neighboring territories, and potential support the Crown might offer in strengthening Ashwood's northern defenses. Kalen spoke with the same measured intelligence Lena had noticed during his address to the full assembly, asking pointed questions that made it clear he had already studied Ashwood's situation carefully before this meeting even began. Throughout the discussion, Lena said little, offering only brief input when directly asked about local customs or geography, details she was, admittedly, well suited to answer given her years spent in Ashwood's territory. She noticed, though she told herself she must be imagining it, that Kalen's questions to her carried a slightly different quality than his questions to Ryder, warmer somehow, as if genuinely curious about her answers rather than simply gathering information. As the meeting drew to a close, and Ryder began expressing his gratitude for the audience, Kalen raised a hand slightly. One more matter, if you do not mind, he said, his eyes moving to Lena. I understand Ashwood has historically maintained strong diplomatic ties with the border villages near the northern pass. I would like to discuss those relationships further, in more detail than we have time for today. Would you be willing to return tomorrow to continue this conversation? Lena blinked, caught off guard by the direct request. Ryder, seemingly pleased that his pack's affairs were receiving such thorough royal attention, answered before she could. Of course, Your Majesty. Lena would be honored to assist however you require. Lena managed a small nod, though internally her thoughts spun rapidly. She could not tell whether Kalen's continued interest was purely diplomatic, related genuinely to Ashwood's border relationships, or whether something else entirely lay beneath his request. As the meeting ended and they were escorted from the chamber, she glanced back once toward the window where Kalen stood, and found him already watching her, his expression unreadable but unmistakably focused entirely on her. She did not know, walking back through the palace corridors beside Ryder and Mira, that the border discussions Kalen had requested were, in truth, only the smallest fraction of what he intended to discover about her, or that a king who had avoided choosing a mate for years, despite constant pressure from his council, had, in the span of one quiet evening in a moonlit garden, found something in an overlooked attendant that he had never expected to find in anyone at all. The second meeting took place the following afternoon, though Lena quickly realized that very little of it actually concerned border villages or diplomatic ties. Kaelin asked a handful of relevant questions early on, enough to maintain the appearance of official business, but as the conversation continued, it drifted naturally into subjects that had nothing to do with Ashwood's northern territories at all. They spoke of the garden again, of the fountain that reminded Lena of the stream near her childhood home, of small things neither of them had any real reason to share with someone as important as the other. Lena found herself relaxing more with each passing minute, the formal stiffness of addressing a king slowly giving way to something closer to the easy comfort she had felt during their first conversation, before she knew his true identity. "You seem more at ease today," Kaelin observed at one point, watching her carefully across the table. "I am trying not to think too hard about who I am speaking with," Lena admitted honestly. "It makes conversation easier." A small, genuine laugh escaped him, quiet but real. "That may be the most honest thing anyone has said to me in this palace in a very long time." Word of Lena's repeated meetings with the king began to spread quietly through the convergence over the following days. What started as a single audience concerning border matters became 3, then 4, each one stretching longer than the last, each one drawing curious glances from other pack representatives who could not understand why an unremarkable attendant from a modest territory continued receiving private audiences with the ruler of all packs. Ryder, for his part, seemed pleased rather than suspicious, viewing the king's continued attention as further proof of Ashwood's rising importance among the gathered territories. He mentioned it proudly to other alphas during meals, boasting about the special relationship his pack had apparently formed with the crown, never once suspecting that the relationship had very little to do with Ashwood at all. Mira, however, watched with a more careful eye. She said nothing directly to Lena at first, but Lena noticed the way her friend's gaze followed her whenever she returned from another meeting with the king. Thoughtful and searching in a way that made Lena slightly uneasy, though she could not have said exactly why. It was during a quiet moment between formal convergence events, as the two friends sat together in the guest quarters preparing for the evening's gathering, that Mira finally voiced what had clearly been building in her mind. "Lena," she said carefully, "I do not mean to pry, but these meetings with the king, are they truly only about border matters?" Lena's hands paused over the ribbon she had been tying into her hair. She considered lying, brushing the question aside the way she had with everyone else who had asked. But something about Mira's careful, gentle tone made honesty feel easier than deflection. "I do not entirely know what they are about," Lena admitted. "We talk about border matters for a few minutes, and then somehow we simply keep talking about other things. I did not plan for this to happen." Mira was quiet for a long moment, studying her friend's face. "Do you have feelings for him?" The question landed harder than Lena expected. She opened her mouth to deny it automatically, the same way she had denied every uncomfortable truth since the night of the mate-choosing ceremony, but the words would not come. Instead, she found herself sitting with the question honestly for the first time, turning it over in her mind. "I do not know," she finally said. "I know that I feel more like myself around him than I have felt around anyone in a very long time. I know that I think about our conversations long after they end. Whether that means what you are suggesting, I truly cannot say." Mira reached over and took her friend's hand, squeezing it gently. "I only want you to be careful. He is a king, Lena. Kings do not simply fall for attendants from small pack territories, no matter how kind they seem in private gardens. I do not want you hurt again, not after everything already." The warning, though clearly given out of genuine care, settled uncomfortably in Lena's chest. She knew Mira meant well, knew the words came from a place of protection rather than judgment, but they also echoed the same fear Lena had been quietly nursing since her very first meeting with Kaelin, the fear that she was, once again, allowing herself to hope for something that would ultimately choose someone else, the way Ryder had. "I am not expecting anything," Lena said, though even as she spoke the words, she was not entirely certain they were true. "We are simply talking, nothing more." That evening, during the Convergence's grand banquet, Lena found herself seated closer to the front of the hall than usual, a subtle shift in placement that she suspected was not accidental. From her new position, She had a clear view of the raised table where Kalen sat among his council, and though he engaged properly with the dignitaries around him throughout the meal, she caught his gaze drifting toward her more than once across the crowded room. After the meal, as musicians began playing and guests moved out onto the open floor to dance, a palace attendant approached Lena quietly. "His Majesty requests the honor of a dance, if you are willing," the attendant said, his voice pitched low enough that only Lena could hear. Lena's heart lurched. A dance with the king, in full view of every pack representative gathered in the hall, was an entirely different matter than private meetings held behind closed doors, under the guise of border discussions. This would be visible. This would be noticed. This would, without question, generate exactly the kind of speculation Mira had warned her about. She glanced toward the raised table, where Kalen watched her with quiet, patient expectation, making no move to pressure her, simply waiting for her answer. Something in his expression, calm yet clearly hopeful, made the decision for her before her more cautious instincts could argue otherwise. "I would be honored," she told the attendant. She rose from her seat and made her way toward the dance floor, aware of curious eyes following her the entire distance. Kalen met her at the edge of the floor, offering his hand with the same quiet formality he brought to every public gesture, though his eyes held something warmer beneath the composed exterior. "You did not have to say yes," he said softly, as the music began and they fell into step together. "I would have understood if you preferred to avoid the attention." "I considered it," Lena admitted honestly, "but I find I am tired of avoiding things simply because they might draw attention." Something shifted in Kalen's expression, approval, and something deeper mixing together, as he guided her smoothly across the floor. "That is a good way to live," he said. "I hope you continue it." They danced through 2 full songs, and though Lena remained acutely aware of the whispers rippling through the watching crowd, she found that with Kalen's steady presence beside her, the attention mattered less than she expected. For the first time since the mate-choosing ceremony, she felt genuinely seen, not as an afterthought standing in someone else's shadow, but as someone worth choosing to notice. When the dance ended, Kalen walked her back toward her table himself, drawing even more attention from the watching guests, before bowing slightly and returning to his own seat among the council. Lena sat back down beside Mira, who studied her with an expression somewhere between concern and cautious hope. "That did not look like nothing," Mira said quietly. Lena watched Kalen across the room, still feeling the warmth of his hand where it had rested against hers during the dance, and for the first time since arriving at the convergence, she allowed herself to consider, however briefly, that perhaps something real was beginning to grow between them, something that had nothing to do with pity or convenience, but with genuine recognition between 2 people who had each, in their own way, spent too long feeling unseen. "No," she admitted softly. "I suppose it did not." News of the dance spread through the convergence faster than Lena could have imagined. By the following morning, whispers followed her through every corridor she walked, pack representatives she had never spoken with, suddenly offering polite greetings, clearly hoping to gain her favor should her connection to the king prove significant. Lena found the sudden attention deeply uncomfortable, so different from the invisibility she had grown used to at home that she barely knew how to respond to it. Ryder, surprisingly, seemed to view the situation with growing unease rather than pride. He cornered Lena outside the guest quarters that morning, his expression tight in a way she had not seen since before the mate-choosing ceremony. "People are saying the king has taken a personal interest in you," he said, his tone carrying an edge Lena could not quite place. "Is that true?" "I do not know what it is," Lena said honestly. "We have spoken several times. He asked me to dance. That is all I can tell you." Ryder was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as though he were chewing on words he could not quite decide whether to say. "That is a great deal more than nothing, Lena. Do you understand what it could mean for you? For Ashwood?" Something in his tone made Lena's spine straighten. "Is that what concerns you? What it could mean for Ashwood?" "Of course it concerns me," Ryder said quickly, though something in his eyes suggested his concern ran along more complicated lines than he was willing to admit. "You are still part of our pack. What happens to you reflects on all of us." Lena studied him carefully, remembering the ceremony. remembering the way his eyes had passed over her without hesitation to land on Mira instead. She thought of all the years she had spent hoping he would see her the way she saw him, and she felt, for the first time, a strange and unexpected clarity settle over her. "I appreciate your concern," she said evenly, "but I am capable of managing my own affairs, Ryder. You made your choice at the ceremony. I do not owe you accounting for mine." She left him standing in the corridor, his expression somewhere between surprise and something harder to name, and made her way toward the palace library, where a messenger had informed her that Kaelin wished to meet, away from the more public spaces of the Convergence. The library was vast, tall shelves stretching up toward a domed ceiling painted with constellations Lena did not recognize. Kaelin waited near a long table near the center of the room, a small stack of old maps spread before him, though Lena suspected, given the pattern of their previous meetings, that the maps were more excuse than genuine purpose. "You look troubled," Kaelin said as she approached, setting aside the map he had been holding. "Word of our dance has spread quickly," Lena admitted, taking the seat he offered across from him. "It has made things complicated with my alpha." Kaelin's expression sharpened slightly at the mention of Ryder, though he kept his tone even. "Complicated how?" Lena hesitated, uncertain how much to share, but the same instinct that had made her honest with him in the garden that first night pushed her forward now. "Ryder chose my closest friend as his bride at our mate-choosing ceremony, only weeks ago. I believe, for many years, everyone including myself expected he would choose me instead. Seeing me draw attention from you now seems to have unsettled him, though I do not entirely understand why, given his own choice." Something dark and quiet moved across Kaelin's face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "He is a fool," he said simply. "Any alpha who had the chance to choose you, and chose otherwise, made an error he will likely spend a great deal of time regretting." The blunt confidence in his statement caught Lena off guard, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks despite herself. "You do not know me well enough to say that with such certainty." "I know enough," Kaelin said, his sharp eyes steady on hers. "I know that you speak honestly, even when honesty costs you comfort. I know that you carry disappointment with grace rather than bitterness. I know that when I sat beside you in that garden, feeling more exhausted by this crown than I have in years, you were the first person in a very long time who made me feel like simply a man again, rather than a title. That is not nothing, Lena. That matters more than you seem to realize." The library fell silent around them, the weight of his words settling between them like something tangible. Lena searched his face for any hint of exaggeration or performance, any sign that his words were simply the practiced charm of a powerful man, accustomed to getting whatever he wanted, but she found none. His expression remained open, sincere, almost vulnerable in a way she suspected few people ever saw from him. "I do not know how to respond to that," she admitted quietly. "You do not need to respond right away," Kaelin said, something gentle entering his voice. "I only wanted you to know it. Whatever happens after this convergence ends, whatever paths our lives take from here, I wanted you to know that what has grown between us, however brief, has been real for me. I have not imagined it." They spent the rest of the afternoon together in the library, conversation flowing more easily than any of their previous meetings, both of them finally speaking without the careful boundaries either had maintained before. Lena learned that Kaelin had become King Young, after his father's sudden passing, and had spent years since then, carrying the weight of leadership with little room for anything resembling a normal life. She learned that his council pressured him constantly regarding the matter of a mate and heir, that he had resisted their pressure for years, unwilling to choose someone simply for political convenience. "Why resist for so long?" Lena asked. "Surely it would have been easier to simply choose someone the council approved of." "Easier perhaps," Kaelin admitted, "but I have watched too many rulers choose convenience over connection, and I have watched the unhappiness that follows such choices for the rest of their lives. I decided long ago that I would rather wait, even if waiting cost me the council's patience, than settle for something hollow." Lena thought of Ryder, of the way he had chosen Mira with such easy confidence at the ceremony, and wondered whether his choice had been born of genuine connection or simple convenience, whether Mira herself sometimes wondered the same thing. She thought too of her own years spent hoping for something that had never truly existed, built more on wishful imagination than real connection. I understand that, she said quietly. I spent years believing I understood someone, only to discover I had built an entire future on assumptions rather than truth. I would rather know something is real before I allow myself to hope for it again. Kalen reached across the table, his hand covering hers gently, warm and steady. Then let us take the time to know, he said. No assumptions, no convenience, simply the truth of whatever grows between us, however long it takes. Lena did not pull her hand away. For the first time since the mate-choosing ceremony, she allowed herself to hope again, carefully, cautiously, but genuinely, for a future she had never imagined possible, one built not on years of silent longing from a distance, but on honest conversation and mutual recognition freely given. Outside the library windows, the convergence continued its final days, unaware that within those quiet walls, a king who had resisted choosing anyone for years had just made a decision that would soon reshape the fate of every pack gathered within the palace grounds. The final days of the convergence brought a shift in the atmosphere throughout the palace, a quiet undercurrent of anticipation that Lena could feel even in rooms where nothing seemed to be happening at all. Pack representatives, sensing that something significant had changed regarding the king's attention, began treating Lena with a mixture of curiosity and careful respect, entirely different from the polite indifference she had experienced upon first arriving. She spent her mornings attending the remaining formal sessions alongside Ryder and Mira, and her afternoons increasingly in Kalen's company, whether in the garden where they had first met, the library, or occasionally walking the palace grounds under the watchful but discreet distance of royal guards. Each conversation deepened what had begun as curious connection into something steadier, something Lena found herself trusting more with every passing day. Meanwhile, back within the Ashwood delegation's quarters, tension had begun to build in ways Lena noticed, but did not fully understand until later. Ryder grew increasingly short-tempered, snapping at attendance over minor matters, spending long hours away from Mira under the excuse of networking with other alphas. Mira, for her part, grew quieter, more withdrawn, watching her new husband with an expression Lena recognized all too well, the same quiet uncertainty she herself had carried for years, while hoping Ryder would eventually choose her. One evening, as Lena returned to the guest quarters after another long conversation with Kalen, she found Mira sitting alone on the small balcony outside their shared room, staring out at the darkening sky with an expression that immediately concerned her. "Mira," Lena said gently, sitting down beside her friend. "What is wrong?" Mira was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I do not think Ryder chose me for the reasons I once believed," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been watching him these past weeks, and I have begun to wonder if he chose me simply because choosing you felt too complicated, too close to something he was not ready to acknowledge." Lena's breath caught. She had wondered something similar herself in the days immediately following the ceremony, though she had pushed the thought away, unwilling to torment herself further with speculation that changed nothing. Hearing Mira voice the same suspicion aloud, unprompted, sent a strange, uncomfortable feeling through her chest. "What makes you say that?" Lena asked carefully. "The way he looks at you sometimes, when he thinks no one notices," Mira said. "The way he grew so tense the moment the king began showing you attention. A man secure in his choice would not react that way, Lena. I do not think I was ever truly his first choice. I think I was simply the safer one, the one that did not carry whatever complicated history existed between the two of you." Lena did not know how to respond. Part of her wanted to reassure Mira, to insist that surely Ryder loved her deeply, and that his behavior meant nothing more than the ordinary stress of new responsibility. But another part of her, the part that had spent years watching Ryder's expressions carefully, hoping to find proof of feelings he never quite confirmed, recognized the painful truth in what Mira was saying. "I am sorry," Lena said quietly, because there was nothing else honest she could offer. "You have nothing to apologize for," Mira said, reaching over to squeeze Lena's hand. "None of this is your fault. I only wish I had understood sooner, before I built an entire life around a choice that may not have been made for the reasons I believed." They sat together in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation settling heavily between them, until Mira finally spoke again, her voice steadier now, resolved in a way that surprised Lena. I do not regret becoming his bride, Mira said, but I think I need to have an honest conversation with him about what this choice truly means for both of us. I cannot continue building a life on uncertainty. Lena admired her friend's courage, recognizing in Mira's determination a strength she herself had lacked for years, while waiting quietly for Ryder to notice her. I think that is wise, Lena said. Whatever the truth is, you deserve to know it clearly, rather than carrying doubt indefinitely. The following day, while Ryder attended a lengthy meeting regarding trade agreements among Northern territories, Mira sought him out privately, and though Lena was not present for their conversation, she learned enough from Mira's expression that evening to understand it had been difficult, honest, and ultimately clarifying for both of them. Ryder had admitted, according to Mira, that his feelings toward Lena in years past had been more complicated than he ever allowed himself to fully examine, and that his choice at the ceremony had been influenced, at least in part, by a desire to avoid confronting those complicated feelings directly. He says he cares for me, Mira told Lena that night, her voice carrying a strange mixture of hurt and relief. And I believe him, but he also admitted the truth I suspected, and strangely, knowing it clearly feels better than the uncertainty did. We have decided to take time to understand what our bond truly means to each of us, rather than simply assuming a title alone defines everything between us. Lena listened carefully, feeling a complicated tangle of emotions she could not fully sort through. Some old hurt finally finding a measure of validation. Some sympathy for both Ryder and Mira as they navigated a situation shaped by choices made too quickly under pressure, and underneath it all, a quiet gratitude that her own path, however unexpected, had led her somewhere that felt increasingly honest and steady. 2 days later, during a formal gathering marking the near end of the convergence, Ryder approached Lena privately, his expression carrying none of the tension she had grown used to seeing in him over recent weeks, replaced instead by something more subdued and sincere. I owe you an apology, he said quietly, once they had found a moment away from the crowd. I think, if I am honest with myself, I have owed you one for a very long time. Lena studied him carefully, remembering the girl she had been for so many years, waiting hopefully for exactly this kind of acknowledgement. Strangely, hearing it now, after everything that had changed, brought less satisfaction than she once imagined it would. I appreciate you saying that, she said honestly, but I think we have both grown past needing it as much as we once might have. Ryder nodded slowly, something like understanding passing across his face. The king, he said carefully, he seems to see you clearly, in a way I never fully allowed myself to. I am glad, Lena, truly, even if it took me far too long to recognize what I nearly lost by not choosing you when I had the chance. Lena felt no bitterness rise within her at his words, only a quiet, settled peace that surprised her with its steadiness. Thank you, Ryder, she said simply. I hope you and Mira find your own honest path forward, whatever that looks like. As the conversation ended, and Ryder returned to the gathering, Lena stood alone for a moment, reflecting on how much had shifted in such a short span of time. The girl who had arrived at this convergence carrying quiet humiliation and buried hope had somehow, through honesty and unexpected connection, found her way towards something steadier and more real than anything she had allowed herself to imagine before. Whatever waited ahead with Kaylin remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, Lena faced that uncertainty without fear, ready to meet whatever came next with the same honesty that had brought her this far. On the final full day of the convergence, tradition called for a ceremonial hunt through the royal forest, an event meant to honor the wolf heritage shared by every pack in attendance. Representatives from each territory gathered at dawn near the palace's eastern gate, dressed in practical clothing suited for running through dense woodland, while palace guards organized the group into smaller parties, meant to explore different sections of the vast forest surrounding the royal grounds. Lena had not expected to be included in such an event, assuming it was reserved for pack leaders and their chosen mates, but a formal invitation arrived that morning, specifically requesting her presence alongside the king's own hunting party, a request that raised eyebrows among the gathered representatives, but one she could hardly refuse given its origin. The morning air was crisp and cool, as the hunting parties set off into the trees, sunlight filtering down through the canopy in scattered golden patches. Kaylin led his group personally, moving through the forest with the easy confidence of someone who had explored these particular woods since childhood, pointing out landmarks and old trails as they walked, occasionally glancing back to ensure Lena kept pace comfortably. "You seem to know this forest well," Lena observed, matching her stride to his, along a narrow path lined with tall ferns. "I spent much of my childhood here," Kalen admitted, a rare softness entering his expression. "Before the crown, before the endless meetings and council pressures, this forest was simply where I felt most myself. I still come here whenever I can manage to escape my duties, even now." They walked together for a while, the rest of the hunting party spreading out gradually among the trees, as everyone followed their own instincts through the woodland. The forest grew quieter the deeper they traveled, the distant sounds of other hunting parties fading, until it felt, for a stretch of time, as though they were entirely alone among the ancient trees. It was during this quiet stretch that Lena noticed something wrong. A prickling unease crawled up her spine, an instinct honed by years of pack training that told her they were no longer alone, despite the surrounding silence. She slowed her steps, glancing around carefully, and caught sight of movement in the underbrush a short distance away, low and deliberate, unmistakably a large animal moving with purpose rather than simple curiosity. "Kalen," she said quietly, urgency creeping into her voice. He turned immediately, his sharp eyes following her gaze toward the underbrush, and his expression shifted instantly from relaxed contentment to focused alertness. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low and controlled, already positioning himself between Lena and whatever moved through the trees ahead. The creature that emerged moments later was a rogue wolf, larger than any ordinary wolf Lena had seen, its posture aggressive and unpredictable, in a way that immediately marked it as separate from any pack, wild and untethered by the social bonds that governed most wolves in the territory. Rogue wolves occasionally wandered into settled lands, driven by desperation or madness, and while encounters were rare, they were understood among all packs to be genuinely dangerous. The wolf's attention fixed immediately on Lena, some instinctive recognition of vulnerability drawing its focus toward her rather than toward Kalen, and before either of them could retreat safely, it lunged forward with startling speed. What happened next occurred faster than Lena could fully process. Kalen moved between her and the charging animal with a speed that seemed almost impossible, his own transformation beginning even as he moved, shifting seamlessly into his wolf form, a powerful presence that met the rogue's charge with controlled, decisive strength. The two wolves collided in a brief, intense struggle, and though Lena's heart pounded with fear, watching Kalen defend her so fiercely, she trusted, somehow, in his ability to manage the confrontation. Within moments, the rogue wolf, recognizing it had encountered strength far beyond its own, retreated back into the deeper forest, choosing survival over continued conflict. Kalen shifted back to his human form almost immediately, turning to Lena with visible concern despite the exertion clearly still working through his body. "Are you hurt?" he asked, closing the distance between them quickly, his hands moving to check her carefully for any sign of injury. "I am fine," Lena assured him, though her voice trembled slightly with the lingering adrenaline of the encounter. "You protected me, thank you." Kalen's hands remained on her shoulders, his expression shifting from concern into something deeper, more intense, as though the encounter had stripped away whatever careful restraint he had maintained throughout their previous meetings. "I could not lose you," he said quietly, his voice rough with feeling. "The moment that creature turned toward you, something in me simply refused to allow any possibility of harm reaching you." Lena looked up at him, her own heart still racing, though now for reasons that had little to do with fear. Something powerful and undeniable moved through the air between them, a recognition that seemed to settle deep into her chest, warm and certain in a way she had never experienced before, not even during her years of hoping for Ryder's attention. "Kalen," she said softly, her voice carrying a question she barely understood herself. "I feel it too," he said, understanding immediately what she could not quite put into words. "The bond. I have heard others describe it, but I never truly believed I would feel it myself, not after all these years of searching without success." The mate bond, when it settled fully into place between them, felt entirely different from anything Lena had imagined during her years of hoping Ryder might one day choose her. This was not built on years of watching from a distance, not built on imagined futures constructed from small, ambiguous gestures. This was immediate and absolute, a certainty that required no interpretation, no hopeful guessing about hidden meaning. I did not expect this, Lena admitted, still processing the overwhelming rightness of what had just happened between them. Not truly, not even after everything these past weeks. Nor did I, Kalen said, his hand rising gently to cup her face. I had nearly given up believing I would ever feel this, after so many years of my counsel pressuring me toward choices that never felt right. And then you sat down on a bench in my garden, simply looking for a quiet moment away from a celebration you did not enjoy, and everything changed. They remained there together for a long while, the forest quiet around them, the earlier danger fading into distant memory beneath the weight of what had just been confirmed between them. Eventually, the sounds of the other hunting parties began drawing closer again, voices calling out through the trees as the larger group reconvened, and Kalen reluctantly stepped back, though his hand remained laced with hers as they made their way back toward the meeting point. This changes everything, Lena said quietly as they walked. Does it not? It does, Kalen agreed, glancing over at her with an expression of quiet, settled certainty. I intend to make my intentions known clearly and publicly, Lena, as soon as it can properly be arranged. I will not spend more time hiding what has grown between us, not when I know now, beyond any doubt, exactly what you mean to me. As they emerged from the trees back into the clearing where the other hunting parties had gathered, several pairs of eyes turned toward them immediately, taking note of their joined hands, the unmistakable shift in the energy between them. Whispers began spreading even before they reached the group fully, and Lena understood, with a mixture of nervousness and quiet joy, that whatever came next would unfold in full view of every pack representative gathered at the convergence, exactly as Kalen had promised. News of the mate bond spread through the palace faster than any announcement could have managed on its own. By the time the hunting parties returned fully to the palace grounds, every representative present seemed to already know, in some form or another, that the Alpha King had found his mate, and that the mate in question was not a princess from a powerful territory, or the daughter of an influential council member, but a quiet attendant from a modest pack most representatives could barely place on a map. The reaction throughout the palace was mixed. Many representatives seemed genuinely delighted, drawn to the romance of a king finally settling into a bond after years of resistance, while others, particularly those from more prestigious territories, who had once hoped their own daughters or sisters might catch the king's attention, reacted with poorly hidden disappointment and skepticism. Ryder's reaction, when Lena encountered him later that evening, carried a complicated mixture of emotions that Lena found herself observing with a strange, distant clarity, as though watching someone she used to know, rather than someone whose opinion still mattered deeply to her. So it is true, Ryder said, finding her near the edge of the evening gathering, his expression tight and unreadable. The king has claimed you as his mate. Yes, Lena said simply, offering no further explanation, uncertain what explanation he believed he was owed. Ryder was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as though wrestling with something difficult to voice. I want you to know, he finally said, that whatever happened between us, whatever choices I made, I never intended to cause you the pain I clearly did. I see now, more clearly than I ever allowed myself to before, exactly what I overlooked when I made my choice at the ceremony. Ryder, Lena said gently, cutting off whatever else he intended to say, I do not need you to relitigate that night. I have made peace with it. Please do not mistake what has grown between Kalen and myself as some sort of victory over you or over the choice you made. This is not about proving anything to you or to anyone else. This is simply about what I have found, independent of everything that came before. Ryder studied her for a long moment, something like genuine understanding finally settling across his features. You are right, he admitted. I apologize. I suppose old feelings surface at strange moments, even when we know better than to indulge them. He walked away after that, and Lena watched him go, feeling not triumph or vindication, but simply a quiet closure, the final settling of a chapter she had spent years unable to properly close on her own. Mira found her shortly afterward, wrapping her in a warm, genuine embrace, before Lena could say anything at all. "I am so happy for you," Mira said, pulling back with tears gathering in her eyes. "Truly, Lena, after everything, you deserve this more than anyone I know." "Thank you," Lena said, returning the embrace fully. "And you? How are things between you and Ryder now?" Mira's expression grew thoughtful. "Better, I think, now that we have spoken honestly. We are choosing to build something real between us, rather than something built on unexamined assumptions. It will take time, but I believe we can find genuine happiness together, in our own way." Not every reaction throughout the palace carried such warmth, however. The Royal Council, several of whose members had spent years pressuring Kaelin toward more strategically advantageous matches, gathered the following morning to formally discuss the matter, and word quickly reached Lena that the discussion had grown heated, with several council members openly questioning whether an attendant from a minor territory possessed the standing necessary to become queen. Kaelin found Lena in the garden that afternoon, the same quiet space where their story had begun, his expression carrying visible frustration despite his attempts to appear composed. "The council is being difficult," he admitted, sitting down heavily on the familiar stone bench. "Several members believe I should reconsider, that a queen chosen from a minor pact territory could weaken important alliances with more powerful houses who had hoped for a different outcome." Lena felt a familiar anxiety stirring in her chest, the old fear of being deemed insufficient rising to the surface, despite everything that had happened between them. "Perhaps they have a point," she said quietly. "I have no experience with matters of governance beyond a small pact territory. Perhaps I am not suited for such a significant role." Kaelin turned to her sharply, his expression fierce in a way she had rarely seen from him. "Do not," he said firmly. "Do not allow their fear and their outdated thinking to make you doubt yourself. I have watched you navigate this entire convergence with more grace, more genuine wisdom, and more honest character than half the council members currently questioning your worth. Standing was never the true measure of a queen's fitness. Character is, and in that, you exceed every candidate they might have preferred instead." His conviction steadied something within her, though the underlying worry did not fully disappear. "What will you do?" she asked. "I will remind my council," Kaelin said, "that the crown belongs to me, and that the choice of who stands beside me, ruling this kingdom, belongs to me as well, not to their outdated notions of what makes someone worthy. I have followed their guidance in matters of governance for years. In matters of the heart, I will follow my own judgment, and my judgment has never been clearer than it is now, standing here with you." That evening, Kaelin called a formal gathering of the full council, along with all remaining convergence representatives, announcing his intention to address the matter directly and publicly rather than allowing rumor and private disagreement to continue shaping the narrative. Lena stood at the edge of the great hall as the assembly gathered, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and quiet resolve, uncertain exactly what Kaelin intended to say, but trusting, deeply, in the conviction she had witnessed in the garden earlier that day. The great hall filled quickly, word of the king's formal address drawing every remaining convergence representative into the space within minutes. Lena stood near the front, close enough to see Kaelin clearly, as he took his place on the raised platform, but far enough back that she remained within the crowd, rather than beside him, uncertain of her exact role in whatever was about to unfold. The council members occupied their customary seats near the platform's edge, their expressions ranging from cautiously neutral to openly disapproving. Lena recognized several faces from the tense discussions that had apparently taken place throughout the day. Older men and women who had clearly hoped their own preferred candidates might eventually catch the king's attention, instead of an unremarkable attendant from Ashwood. Kaelin waited until the hall had fully quieted before speaking, his voice carrying the same measured authority Lena remembered from his opening address at the start of the convergence, though now underscored with something firmer, more personally invested than any official matter of border disputes or trade agreements had carried. "I called this gathering," Galen began, "to address directly a matter that has already spread through this palace as rumor, in order to speak the truth of it plainly, rather than allow speculation to continue shaping a decision that belongs to me alone." The hall remained silent, every eye fixed on him with rapt attention. "During this convergence," he continued, "I have found my mate. The bond confirmed itself beyond any doubt during the ceremonial hunt 2 days ago, and I have felt its truth in every moment since. I intend to make Lena of Ashwood Pack my queen. A murmur rippled through the crowd, though Kaelin raised a hand, silencing it before it could grow into full discussion. I understand, he continued, that certain members of my council believe this choice unwise, given Ashwood's modest standing among our territories. I understand the political calculations that typically guide such decisions, and I have respected those calculations in matters of governance for years without complaint. But I will not allow political calculation to dictate a bond that nature itself has confirmed as true. The mate bond is not something any of us choose deliberately, weighing strategic advantage against political convenience. It is something recognized, undeniable, arriving regardless of whether it aligns neatly with expectation. He paused, his eyes finding Lena across the crowded hall, and something in his expression softened, even as his voice remained firm and commanding. I have watched Lena navigate difficult circumstances with grace I have rarely witnessed in anyone, regardless of their birth or standing. I have watched her offer honesty, even when honesty cost her comfort, watched her extend genuine kindness to those around her, even after being treated unkindly herself, watched her carry herself with quiet dignity through humiliation that would have broken many others. These qualities, I believe, matter far more in a future queen than the size of the territory she happened to be born into. Elder statesman Corin, one of the most senior council members and among the most vocal critics of the match, rose slowly from his seat, his expression stern but not entirely unkind. Your Majesty, he said carefully, we do not doubt her character, only the practical implications of such a choice. Powerful territories may take offense at being overlooked in favor of a lesser house. Then let them take offense, Kaelin said evenly. I did not become king to spend my life pleasing every powerful house that hoped to gain influence through my marriage. I became king to lead wisely, and wisdom, in this matter, has shown me clearly where genuine partnership lies. Lena of Ashwood will be my queen, and I trust that in time, even those currently skeptical will come to recognize the strength of character she brings to this role, strength that no amount of territorial prestige could ever replace. The hall remained tense for a long moment, the weight of the king's declaration settling over the gathered representatives. Then, slowly, one voice began to rise in support, a younger council member who had remained quiet throughout the earlier debates. I have watched Lady Lena these past weeks as well, the young councillor said, standing to address the hall. I have watched her handle every situation with more wisdom than her modest background would suggest. I believe His Majesty has chosen well, and I offer my full support. Other voices began joining in gradually. Representatives who had grown genuinely fond of Lena during her time at the Convergence moved to speak in her favor, despite the political risk of contradicting the more senior, skeptical council members. Even Elder Corin, though his expression remained cautious, offered a slow, measured nod of acceptance rather than continued resistance. I will not pretend all my concerns have vanished, Corin said finally, but I have served long enough to recognize conviction when I witness it, Your Majesty. If this is truly the bond nature has given you, I will not stand against it further. I only ask that Lady Lena prove herself capable of the role ahead, as I am certain she will, given what I have observed thus far. Kaelin's shoulders relaxed slightly at this concession, and he turned to address Lena directly, extending his hand toward her across the hall in clear invitation. Lena stepped forward slowly, aware of every eye in the room following her movement, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and quiet determination as she made her way toward the platform. She climbed the steps and took Kaelin's offered hand, standing beside him in full view of the assembled representatives, no longer the overlooked attendant who had arrived at this convergence carrying quiet humiliation, but someone standing confidently in a role she had never imagined for herself, chosen not out of convenience or political calculation, but out of genuine, undeniable recognition. Thank you, Kaelin said quietly, for her ears alone, as the hall erupted into a mixture of applause and continued murmured discussion, for trusting this, even when trusting it was not easy. Thank you for choosing honestly, Lena replied, her own voice steady, despite the overwhelming weight of the moment. Even when honesty cost you political convenience, As the hall's reaction settled into something closer to genuine celebration, with more and more representatives offering their congratulations and support, Lena caught sight of Ryder and Mira near the back of the crowd, both watching with expressions that carried genuine warmth rather than any lingering bitterness. Ryder offered her a small, respectful nod, an acknowledgement of everything that had shifted between them, while Mira's face beamed with unmistakable pride and happiness for her closest friend. Lena stood beside Kaylin as the formal announcement concluded, understanding fully now that everything she had once believed, lost on the night of the mate-choosing ceremony had, through an unexpected and winding path, led her somewhere far greater than anything she had originally hoped for, a future built not on years of quiet waiting and unspoken assumptions, but on genuine recognition, honest partnership, and a bond that no political calculation could ever diminish. The weeks following the announcement passed in a whirlwind of preparation, unlike anything Lena had ever experienced. The royal coronation, meant to formally crown her as queen alongside Kaylin's continued reign, required careful planning across every aspect of palace life, from the ceremonial robes she would wear to the guest list spanning every pack territory in the kingdom. Lena, who had spent most of her life in the quiet corners of Ashwood Pack, found herself at the center of preparations grand enough to make her head spin. Her aunt traveled from Ashwood to attend the coronation, arriving at the palace with tears in her eyes as she embraced Lena for the first time since the convergence had begun. "I always believed you deserved more than that pack ever gave you," her aunt said, holding Lena's face gently between her hands. "I did not imagine it would be this much more, but I am overjoyed regardless." Lena spent long hours in those final weeks, learning the responsibilities that would soon fall to her as queen, studying the histories of various pack territories, learning the delicate balance of diplomacy required to maintain peace among dozens of distinct groups, each with their own traditions and concerns. Kaylin remained a steady presence throughout this preparation, patient in his teaching, never once making her feel inadequate for arriving at this role without the lifelong preparation many assumed a future queen should possess. "You are learning faster than most council members expected," he told her one evening, as they reviewed territorial maps together in the palace study. "I believe in time, you will surprise every skeptic who doubted this choice." "I hope so," Lena admitted. "I still feel the weight of their doubt sometimes, even now." "That doubt will fade," Kaylin assured her. "Character speaks louder than skepticism, given enough time to prove itself. And you have already proven more character than most people demonstrate across an entire lifetime." Mira visited frequently during those weeks, her friendship with Lena settling into something even stronger than it had been before the mate-choosing ceremony had briefly strained it. The two women spent afternoons together, whenever Lena's preparations allowed, laughing over shared memories from their childhood in Ashwood, marveling together at how dramatically both their lives had changed in such a short span of time. "Ryder and I are doing well," Mira told her during one such visit, sitting together in the palace gardens, where Lena's story with Kaylin had first begun. "We have chosen to build something honest between us, taking things slowly, rather than assuming a title alone defines our bond. I believe, in time, we may find genuine happiness together, though it looks different than what either of us originally expected." "I am glad," Lena said sincerely, and she meant it fully, without any lingering trace of old hurt clouding her happiness for her friend. "You deserve honesty and genuine partnership, Mira, just as much as I do." As the day of the coronation finally arrived, Lena stood in her private chambers, dressed in flowing robes of deep blue and silver, the royal colors that would soon become as familiar to her as the simple dresses she had worn throughout most of her life in Ashwood. Her aunt helped arrange her hair, weaving small white flowers through the dark strands, similar to the ones that had glowed softly in the garden the night she first met Kaylin, without knowing his true identity. "You look every bit the queen you are about to become," her aunt said, stepping back to admire the finished result with pride glowing in her eyes. Lena studied her own reflection in the tall mirror, hardly recognizing the confident, composed figure looking back at her. She thought of the girl who had stood frozen at the edge of the mate-choosing ceremony, humiliated and heartbroken, certain her future held nothing but quiet disappointment. That girl could never have imagined standing here now, moments away from being crowned queen of every pack territory in the kingdom, chosen not out of convenience or pity, but out of genuine, undeniable connection. The ceremony itself took place in the Great Hall, now decorated with flowers and banners, far more elaborate than anything Lena had witnessed even during the Convergence's grandest celebrations. Every Pact territory had sent representatives, filling the hall with hundreds of guests, eager to witness the formal crowning of their new queen. Ryder and Mira sat among the Ashwood delegation, both beaming with genuine pride, as Lena made her way down the long aisle toward the platform where Kaelin waited. Elder Corrin, the same council member who had once voiced the strongest doubts about her suitability, stood ready to perform the formal crowning ceremony, a role Kaelin had specifically requested of him as a gesture of unity following the earlier disagreements. As Lena climbed the platform steps and knelt before him, Corrin's expression carried none of the skepticism from weeks before, replaced instead by genuine respect. "I confess," Corrin said quietly, for her ears alone as he lifted the ceremonial crown, "I doubted this choice deeply when it was first announced. I have watched you these past weeks, however, and I now believe His Majesty chose more wisely than any political calculation could have guided him toward. It is my honor to crown you today." Tears gathered in Lena's eyes as the crown settled gently onto her head, the weight of it far lighter than she had imagined, carrying not the burden of obligation she had feared, but the quiet certainty of a role she had genuinely grown into earning. The hall erupted into applause and celebratory howls as Corrin announced her formally as queen, the sound washing over her like the fulfillment of every hope she had once believed lost forever. Kaelin reached for her hand as she rose, pulling her close beside him as they turned together to face the celebrating crowd, two people who had found each other through honest connection rather than expectation or convenience, standing now as partners ready to lead their kingdom together. "Do you remember," Kaelin murmured to her quietly, beneath the continuing celebration, "what you told me that first night in the garden, before either of us knew who the other truly was?" "I told you I felt invisible," Lena said softly, "overlooked by someone I had spent years hoping would choose me." "And now," Kaelin said, his eyes warm with genuine affection as he looked at her, "you stand chosen and seen by an entire kingdom, Queen, not because tradition demanded it, but because I recognized, from that very first conversation, something rare and worth cherishing in you." Lena smiled, feeling the truth of his words settle deeply into her heart, understanding fully now what she had only begun to suspect weeks before in that quiet moonlit garden. Sometimes, what felt like devastating rejection was simply life clearing a path toward something far greater than anything she could have imagined for herself. The Alpha who once overlooked her had, in his own way, set her free to find a connection built on genuine recognition, rather than years of quiet, uncertain hope. As the celebration continued around them, filling the great hall with music and joy late into the evening, Lena stood beside Kaelin, no longer the overlooked girl from a modest Pact territory, but a queen who had found her rightful place, not through waiting patiently for someone else to notice her worth, but through embracing honestly who she was, and trusting, finally, that the right connection would recognize that worth, exactly as it deserved to be recognized. Her story, which had begun with heartbreak on the night of a mate-choosing ceremony, had transformed into something far richer than she ever could have planned, proof that sometimes, the greatest beginnings grow from the very moments that once felt like devastating endings.